Dorsey, we can start. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Krishnan PN, Director of Research, The Indian Futures, an independent global think tank based in New Delhi. Welcome you all to today's session of the Expert Talks. The topic of the day is the President Trump's Gulf Yatra, implications for regional and global geopolitics. In this session, we are going to have a conversation with Dr. James M. Dorsey, Adjunct Senior Fellow, S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, Singapore. A very warm welcome, Dr. James Dorsey, to the Indian Future.
Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. Welcome. Dr. Dorsey is a widely published author in peer-reviewed journal and as well as in non-academic publications such as Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and Financial Times. A veteran and award-winning foreign correspondent for 4 decades in Middle East, Africa, Latin America, Europe, and United States. Two-time nominee for the Pulitzer Prize in 1980 and 1988, a finalist for the 2012 European Press Prize, as well as Amnesty International Media Awards. With this, I just want to introduce the topic first. To put it into context, I just would like to say what has changed from the previous Trump trip to the region in 2017. What are the things have changed now and how the things are placed? The first one I would like to say that 7th October 2023, the Hamas attacks in Israel and the subsequent Gaza war that is still underway, diplomatic normalization of Iran and Saudi Arabia, and the direct military confrontation and exchange between Israel and Iran, and the subsequent decimation of the Iranian proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, and other ones in Iraq, and the Houthi attack in the Red Sea, and Israel and US strike on Houthis. And the most of all, the fall of Assad regime in Syria is some of the important events which has changed completely the region. To understand it better, I would like to put in the perspective the region is having basically the three important power centers. They are Iran, Israel, and the Saudi Arabia, which is the leader of the Arab world, and the four major global powers which are having the competition in the region: the United States, China, Russia, and India. So when we see this tour and yatra of President Trump to the region, we are, in the first glance, on the surface, we find this is totally a geoeconomics, and there is less of geopolitics. Investment of above $2 trillion, defense deals and cooperations, unprecedented AI partnership and investment, Trump's huge entourage of CEOs and bankers, and the conduct of at the same time the US Saudi Investment Forum. But when we scratch a little deeper, we find the tour demonstrates many shifts from the earlier US policy and the practices in the region. In that, I would like to mention few things. In that, the most important one, the meeting with the Syrian leader and the describing of him in a glowing words, and then loud recognition and credit to the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the Turkey's president, who joined also in the video call while the meeting was going on with the Syrian leader. Emphasis on humanitarian aid to the Gaza and talk of ceasefire. And then we have civil nuclear deal with Saudi Arabia without its normalization with Israel, which was the precondition before during the Biden administration. With this, we have put this entire topic into the context. Now, Dr. Dorsey, let us start the conversation. And first, I would like to know from you what you exactly think, because right from the presidential election days, President Trump has said so many things about the region, about Gaza, about Hamas, about Iran, and then about his own Arab partners. In that context, What has been the core geopolitical intent and the goal of this tour beyond the massive economic, defense, and AI deals made during the trip? Dr.
Well,
James
thank you
Dorsey.
very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you. Um, Let me challenge a little bit of what you said in your introduction, if I may. I don't
Oh,
disagree with the factual assessment. I think, though, that what we're seeing in some ways is we're seeing shifts. There's no question about it. But we're also seeing a reaffirmation, perhaps a much stronger reaffirmation of relationships and of relationships and dependencies, if you wish, that have existed all along. So what is let's go through what has changed first and foremost. Clearly, there are at this point two from the US perspective, from the Trump administration's perspective, two power centers. That's Israel and the Gulf. Before that, it was only Israel, despite close relations with the Gulf. And the how that's going to evolve, we're still in the process to see that. It's not clear. Um, what the relationship between the United States and Israel going forward is going to be is not clear. Uh, so that's one change. The second change is, of course, the fallout of the Gaza war, without question, which has become a dominant theme in uh, the Middle East. Um, the third thing that has changed is, or not changed. Oh, let me rephrase this. What we're seeing in terms of continuancy, if you wish, are a number of things. First of all, the Gulf's relationship to the United States. The Gulf states have no alternative when it comes to defense and security to the United States. It's as simple as that. There is no other country both willing and capable of replacing the role of the United States. And by and large, there's no other country with the sophistication of weaponry that the United States has to offer. And so what you're seeing is the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, very smartly playing into President Trump's uh, transactionalism, as you wish, and his focus on the American economy. And in exchange, indeed, uh, there's greater access to artificial intelligence cooperation and all of these other things. So, in that sense, really a building on a continuance of a situation. There are important changes as a result of that. If in the past, certainly under the Biden administration, and to some degree under the first Trump administration, the emphasis in relationship with the Gulf was a security relationship whereby China was the economic player in the region. The United States is now challenging that in very important ways. And in many ways may again become the dominant rather than a dominant force in the Gulf. The second change we've seen is that this is an administration that in the first 3 months since it came to office has clearly messaged Israel that Israeli and U.S. interests are not by definition identical, that they can diverge.
thank
You
you.
see that on Iran, and I'll come back to Iran in a second. You see that, which was unthinkable for any former administration, to conclude an agreement with a rebel group that controls the state, the Houthis in this case, in Yemen, that deals exclusively with US interests, does not involve Israeli interests, with other words, a halt to Houthi attacks on Israel, is unprecedented. You saw a US president make his first overseas trip, if we leave aside the funeral of Pope Francis,
Yes,
to the Middle East without visiting Israel.
thank you.
In fact, what you saw even before Trump came into office was that he arm twisted Netanyahu into a ceasefire in Gaza. The question is whether he's going to do that again. And let me just note on a side note there that Trump wants to see an end to the Gaza war, but in many ways he agrees with Israel's Gaza war goal. He agrees with the goal of destroying Hamas. As a matter of principle, agrees with the principle of resettlement of the Palestinian population of the Strip.
Yes.
And then finally, if I may, there's Iran. Uh, there's a much clearer, much more concerted effort to get a nuclear agreement than there was under the Trump administration.
Thank you.
There are and Trump has made very clear that he has not taken military action off the table, but he has made very clear that he wants to see a negotiated resolution to this. Whether that will happen remains to be seen. Um, there are, in my mind, three issues. Issue number one is enrichment. And that is complicated by the fact that Trump needs to produce an agreement that is different from the 2015 international agreement that Iran abided by. Because if he doesn't produce an agreement that is different, then the question is what's the justification with all its repercussions of abandoning that agreement in 2018 during his first term of office.
All right.
Enrichment's in line with the Non-Proliferation Treaty and the International Atomic Energy Agency regulations is uh, is a right that Iran has within certain limits. The United States seems to be demanding that it will not have any right to enrichment, and if so, that could be a game change. Then there's the issue of ballistic missiles, which we can go into later, and the issue, as you referred to earlier, of non-state allies.
Yes. Thank you. I want to take it from your words that now the only biggest change is that United States is thinking that its interest is not identical with that of Israel. So in that context, I would like to go to the specifics. If you see the defense deals, the largest defense deal in the history, 142 billion, was done with Saudi Arabia, and which is giving the state of art war-fighting equipment and services. Plus, it is also the Raytheon is having its deal with the Qatar $1 billion agreement for the counter drone capabilities. And at the same time, US and Qatar is having the 38 billion potential investment for the upgrade of the Al Udeid Air Base, the largest of the US in the region, and for its primacy in the region, it's very, very important. So, given this scenario, when you are saying that the first change you are finding that Israel's interest is not identical anymore with the US. So, in that context, I would like to know from you, is it going to affect the Israel's qualitative military edge in the region, its security, which the US has long been committed for?
Well, I think, interestingly enough, Israel has not raised that argument. Israel has a history of opposing certain arms sales, go back to the AWACS in the 1980s with Saudi Arabia. It has not opposed any of the defense or military deals that Trump concluded on his tour of the Gulf. It has not raised the issue uh, of the qualitative military edge. As a matter of principle, Israel no longer sees the Gulf states as potential threats. Its threat matrix, if you wish, is focused on the Palestinians, particularly on eliminating or squashing Palestinian national aspirations in whatever form they may emerge, and it's focused on Iran, which is why Israel has basically opposed the nuclear talks with Iran. Keep in mind that Trump sprung those talks on Netanyahu in the Oval Office as he was sitting next, as Netanyahu was sitting next to Trump, and it came as a surprise to the Israeli Prime Minister. It was not something that had been coordinated in advance, and Netanyahu has basically reluctantly and hesitantly been forced to endorse those talks, but is pressing behind the scenes for a military strike. Now, coming back to, I think there's an important point that one has to make here with regard to the U.S. administration no longer viewing um, Israeli and U.S. interests as identical. For all practical matters, there's a power struggle going on in Washington within the administration between uh, whatever you want to call them, the isolationists, the America First crowd, the Make America Great Again crowd, whatever label you want to attribute, who basically are critical of Israel, uh, not anti-Israel, but critical of Israel, and do see that America has other interests than Israel may have, and that Israel at times can be a problem. And that struggle is with uh, those elements in the administration that are pro-Israel and see an identity of interests and seek to promote that. On balance, at this point, those that believe that Israeli interests and U.S. interests are identical seem to be losing ground. And all of those incidents that we've talked about, Yemen, Iran, ceasefire, and so on, uh, and the firing of or the replacement of U.S. National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, the firing of some of his associates, all of that points to the Make America Great Again crowd, if you wish, getting an upper hand.
Thank you. In continuation of the same, in Saudi Arabia, regarding the US Saudi civil nuclear agreement, which was earlier the precondition for Saudi Arabia's normalization and joining the Abraham Accord, it was it was a condition for that. But now it has been agreed that it is going to be signed. The U.S. Energy Secretary, the Chris Wright, said that they are going to process it under the 1954 nuclear agreement, 123 agreement. So this all is going on. But at the same time, I think many times President Trump has said that it is his dream that Saudi Arabia joins the Abraham Accord. But at the same time, when he was addressing the Saudi US investment forum, he saw towards the crown prince and said, "But you will do it in your own time." So what this made the President Trump to do go ahead with the civil nuclear agreement without fulfilling Saudi Arabia fulfilling the precondition of joining the Abraham Accord and saying this that you
Well,
can join in your own time.
first of all, I wouldn't assume that Trump has given up on the idea of Saudi recognition of Israel. I think it was made very clear to him in Riyadh that there would be no Saudi recognition of Israel as long as there was not a irreversible path towards a Palestinian state. And obviously, that's not on the table at this moment with this Israeli government. Trump was not going to walk away from a deal that involves 16 nuclear reactors in Saudi Arabia. So what he's basically done is he's decoupled what Saudi Arabia wanted in exchange for recognition of Israel. And let's keep in mind that Mohammed bin Salman, certainly till the Gaza war, wanted to recognize Israel. He saw that as a Saudi interest. Perceptions to some degree have changed of Israel as a result of the Gaza war. And I think it was very clear to Trump that he was going to lose the nuclear deal if he continued to link that.
Thank you.
Now, let me just make one other point on the nuclear deal. The real question here is whether or not the the Trump administration is going to insist on the 1-2-3 rule, which involves the question of enrichment in Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia has uranium of its own and wants to enrich its own uh, uh, its own uranium for peaceful purposes. Whether or not the United States is going to go along with that, one of the major hurdles prior to Trump coming to office a second time was the fact that the United States did not want Saudi Arabia to be enriching its own uranium.
Okay, moving on, and the next important the part of the trip was the AI deals. Given the amount of artificial intelligence deals and the partnership inked during the trip, despite a lot of disagreement and skepticism back in the US. How do you view this all-out AI cooperation and partnership in the Gulf? And is this the is the massive AI partnership and the strategic a strategic push to undercut the expanding Chinese influence in the region in the technological field?
Well, I think first of all, let's be clear. Artificial intelligence is a growth industry. It's a major growth industry. Both Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have made artificial intelligence a major pillar of their economic policies and of their vision of their economic development. So I think those are the major drivers. Now, what it means, and again, that was on the table earlier. With other words, the United States under Biden, and in fact under Trump, Trump one, uh, was reluctant in terms of technology to to go too far with the Gulf states because of their relationships with China. And it was both Saudi Arabia and the UAE that under the Biden administration already said to the United States, we will weaken our technological ties to China, if not break those technological ties in exchange for greater cooperation with the United States. So, in other words, this was coming
Yeah.
already before Trump, and Trump very skillfully exploited it,
Yes.
as did the Gulf states for that matter.
Okay. A link to that is that David Sachs, the White House AI and the crypto czar, and the Sriram Krishnan, the senior White House policy advisor for the artificial intelligence. The two are supposed to be the architect of this AI deal in the during the tour, and David Sachs has written in his, and I would like to quote him that if we align with them, we will pull them into our orbit. If we reject them, we will drive them into China's arm. In fact, it will backfire by creating a Huawei Belt and Road. In this perspective, is it really a strategic move? Is it really going to work beneficial for the United States or run a lot of risk given its previous experiences? Because G42, the biggest AI company in the United Arab Emirates, they had a very close partnership and cooperation with the Chinese company ByteDance, and there lot many transfers were going on. And the last year, Microsoft, last year around 16th of April last year, they came and they inked the deal of 1.5 billion. So, and with the promise of the UAE that they will divest from the Chinese companies and will work only with the American company. And at the same time, the vice chair of Microsoft and the president will be in the board of the uh, uh, G42 company. But given this situation and the history of UAE to cooperate with the Chinese company, will it be safe for the United States to go all out with all this cooperation, AI cooperation in the region, basically with the G42, same company whose CEO Peng Xiao was the man, dubious man, who was earlier the US citizen and now the UAE citizen, having the lot of relationship and contact with the Chinese AI companies.
Well, first of all, nothing is without risk. So, yes, there is risk without question. Um, and while I have no doubt that the UAE and Saudi Arabia are sincere in wanting, first and foremost, the cooperation with the United States, I would not be surprised if both of those countries also keep a backdoor open to China. And it won't be G42, it will be some other entity, and so on and so forth. And we'll see how that works out and whether or not the United States turns a blind eye to something like that or lets it happen. But even so, if these deals, as they've been announced or as they have been projected, go forward, this is US dominance, with or without a Chinese technological presence in the region.
All right. So now moving to the other areas, and basically the most dramatic scene, I think, during the trip was the meeting of President Donald Trump with the leader of Syria, Ahmed al-Shara. So on that, and he described him as a young, attractive guy with a very strong past, and was great. And the president, but at the same time, President Trump also asked him to cooperate with Israel and join Abraham Accord. In this situation, is US planning for an enhanced engagement and dominate in Syria with the reduction of Russian and Iranian influence with the fall of Assad regime, as well as to manage the rising ambitions and expansion of influence of Turkey in that country?
Well, first of all, I think the meeting between Trump and Ahmed al Shara was less dramatic than everybody else thinks. I think it's one and one is two. Uh, Bashar al Assad was a crucial component in the axis of resistance, with the Iranian-backed alliance of Syria and various non-state actors, including Hezbollah, Hamas, the Iraqi Shiite militias, the Houthis in Lebanon. Breaking that breaking that link through Syria was a crucial move. Um, the problem with I think the reason why uh, or let me just say, already under Biden, you had moves to ease sanctions on Syria and to give Bashar al-Assad, sorry, Ahmed al-Shara, a chance. You saw also the essentially for all practical matters, the arrest warrant, the bounty being annulled. So that was a process that was already ongoing. The issue, of course, with Ahmed al-Shara goes back to a very fundamental ideological divide that is not only in the Biden, Trump administration, but is across the board, which is once a jihadi, always a jihadi. Is that correct? Or can jihadis change? Jihadis are human beings. Of course, they can change, and changes the fundamental nature of human beings. So that's where the drama is. You have here a former jihadi who's a conservative Muslim. Let's be very clear about it, but uh, has a track record of over a decade moving away from jihadism, and I think that's what made this meeting dramatic. Uh, Ahmed al-Shara has inherited a country with multiple problems. One of those problems are the minorities, whether that's the Kurds in the north, who want a federated state, not a unitary Syrian state, because they want a degree of autonomy, which is opposed by Turkey. And let's be clear, there are two occupiers of Syrian territory in Syria. One is Turkey, with a buffer zone in the north, and the other is Israel, with moving into the UN buffer zone and beyond. Um, and and then there are, of course, the Alawites, who, and it's unclear to what degree, where you had the fighting in March, to what degree the Iranians were not backing the Alawites. But and so Ahmed al-Shara, from the outset, despite the Israeli move to virtually destroy Syria's military infrastructure and arsenal, and positioning himself as a protector of the Druze, a Muslim minority sect in southern Syria, as well as declaring the Kurds to be their natural allies.
Okay. So,
Ahmed al-Shara is basically bent over backwards to try and convince the Israelis that he is not a threat and that he will not, or that Syria will not serve as a basis for militants or for anti-Israeli militants. And you've seen in recent weeks the de facto expulsion of Palestinian leaders from Syria, including Hamas, including the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and others. I think it would be jumping to conclusions to say that Syria is on the verge of recognizing Israel. There is no Arab state, virtually no Arab state, where a majority of the population, under the current circumstances, with with the war in Gaza going on, with the declared war goal of ethnic cleansing, there is no Arab state that could afford to, in terms of its own population, afford to recognize Israel. And Ahmed al-Shara knows that very well.
so you mean that the US is going to engage massively all out in in Syria?
Well, what I clearly what Trump has said is he wishes to give Syria a chance.
Yes.
Now, does that mean that he's not going to be an obstacle rather than that he's going to invest heavily in Syria? Sure, if the Syrians want to give American construction companies contracts, Trump will be happy to accept those. But I don't see Trump investing on a significant scale in Syria. The One of the real questions is, what is he going to be doing in terms of the Kurds? Because keep in mind that the Kurds are US backed. They played a very crucial role. They were the shock troops on the ground against the Islamic State. And the United States has not really formulated a clear policy on that, although the framework agreement that was reached between the Syrian Kurdish military leader and Ahmed al Shara was inspired by the United States.
Okay. Well, with this, now we are moving to Iran. And though Iran was not directly in the trip, but it was all around. And the fifth round of nuclear talk between Iran and US has just been over 2 days back. And it is being said it is still progressing because the both are not coming out of that. They still want to talk. So in that way, it is taken as a progress. But at the same time, it looks like none of the Gulf states where the president trip was there, they all are not on the side of the war, any kind of strike on Iran, and they want a deal. And that President Trump said in Qatar that the Qatar Amir is fighting with him to not to have a extreme action against Iran and must have a negotiated diplomatic solution. So, in that context, is there a shift in President Trump's Iran policy from maximum pressure to the strategic engagement? How you foresee the outcome of the talks can be negative, can be positive, and how it's going to have a geopolitical consequences for the region and beyond.
First of all, there has been a shift in Gulf attitudes towards Iran since 2015. The Gulf states, like Iran, were opposed to the 2015 international agreement. Today, in fact, some of the Gulf states favored at the time military action against Iran. And Netanyahu, at the time, was pushing for military action. Today, they don't want to see military action. They understand that they potentially could be targets if an all out war with Iran were to erupt. They're concerned. Now, keep in mind, the Gulf states' primary concern with Iran never was nuclear. It always was ballistic missiles and non state allies. That is not to say that they were not concerned about nuclear, but in terms of the prioritization, if it was for the United States and Israel nuclear first, it was for the Gulf states nuclear last. Now, the Gulf states simply, given that we've already had more than a year and a half of war in the Middle East, or of wars, if you wish, in the Middle East. You still have the conflicts in Syria, or the potential of Syria falling apart and exploding. You have still potential violence with the Houthis. Uh, in that context, the Gulf states don't want to see a war. They don't want to see an attack on Iran.
All right.
Whether or not these now, Iran doesn't want to see a war,
Yes.
and Trump doesn't want to see a war. The
Yes.
only one that may want to see a war is Netanyahu. And so I think that's a very important base.
Yes. So with this, I
That,
would like, yeah. So,
if
sure.
I may,
Please. Please.
that does not mean that this will lead to a successful negotiation. I think at the end of the day, what you're going to need is a a a uh, a formula that allows Trump and the Iranians to save face. That's not going to be achieved within the 2 month framework that Trump has demanded. So, what some analysts have suggested may be the way out of this, which is a framework agreement that has some vaguely defined principles that allows Trump to say we have an agreement, and at the same time allows negotiations to continue.
Yes. With this, I would like to just take you to the related what you said, the framework of, and basically the red line is there between the two, talking about the nuclear deal, US and Iran, is the enrichment. And in that process, the framework, the enrichment is about that in 11th of May, 2 days before the trip started, the Trump's trip started in the Gulf, the Iranian foreign minister reportedly has given the proposal of regional nuclear consortium. In that, the Arabs will be providing the finance and the Iranian will give the technology, and in that way they will have the Arab states who are rival of Iran will have the oversight. Maybe the US is also having the oversight, and it is almost like JCPOA of 2015, but only difference is that the JCPOA of 2015 was having 15 years of sunset clause and it is permanent. Can this be a point of agreement with some modification down the line? You can see that.
It's a very smart proposal. The elephant in the room is, where is the uranium going to be enriched?
Yes.
And the Iranians have, in that proposal, not conceded that it would not be enriched in Iran. And so I think we have to see where this goes. But
Yes.
as a matter of principle, it's a smart move.
Yes. Thank you. And because the as far as the you just responded to that Saudi civil nuclear agreement, in that 123 clause agreement, the US is not willing to allow Saudi Arabia to enrich. So in this, it looks like 2 days before 11th of May, before the trip started, the Iranian foreign minister has visited these three countries, Qatar, UAE, and Saudi Arabia, met his counterparts there and briefed them about. So, do you think that this consortium, regional consortium idea, is having the backing of the Gulf states?
I wouldn't be surprised if they would not go along with it. I mean, I don't see why they would not. Now, I think that the visit by Arakchi, the Iranian foreign minister, to the three Gulf states was about more than just that proposal. He clearly wanted to get, and keep in mind that long before that, the Saudi defense minister visited Iran, which was a an almost unprecedented move. I think the Arakchi wanted to be made clear or very clear to the various Gulf states what Iran's position is, and wanted to convince them that it is sincere about these elections, so that that would influence what they say to Trump when he arrived a few days later.
All right. Thank you. And with this, I'll be taking this nuclear deal because it's a very, very important one. And if it is resolved, large amount of problem of the region can be resolved. So I'll be taking it to the global geopolitical level. And in that, I would like to bring the two more important global powers, China and Russia, is very much engaged so far as the nuclear talk is concerned. First, on 14th March, there was a trilateral between Iran, China, and Russia in Beijing. And after that, on 8th of April, the same trilateral was there in Moscow. And they have given the 5 point proposal to have a diplomatic negotiated settlement. And at the same time, they're talking about rights of enrichment, uranium enrichment to Iran under NPT. So, how much the President Trump trip has been able to deal with these pursuits of the Chinese and the Russians about the nuclear talk, and what kind of implication, regional and global implication, the talk can have?
I frankly wouldn't attribute too much importance to the Iranian discussions with the Russians and the Chinese. I think what's very important is obviously that China and Russia support the notion of a negotiated settlement, and they're not spoilers. So, in that sense, I think that's very important. That Iran consults
Yes.
with its foremost allies or foremost partners, China and Russia, is par for the course. You wouldn't expect more and you wouldn't expect less. That the Chinese and the Russians, as a matter of principle, as long as it's a reasonable position, would support the Iranian position is also par for the course. Having said all of that, these are negotiations that are going to be decided by the United States and Iran. They're not going to be decided by Russia. They're not going to be decided by China. And they're not going to be decided by Europe. Keep in mind that the Iranians also consulted the Europeans, the other party to the 2015 international nuclear agreement. Um, all of those consultancies are legitimate and fair, but this is between the United States and Iran.
All right. So now we are moving to Gaza. The President Trump, this Trump 2.0 started with the very ceasefire, and a lot of situation happened and a lot of expectations was there. And then he came up with the idea of owning Gaza and turning it into Riviera of Middle East, and which the Arab Summit has rejected in Egypt and later on also. And in 7th May, immediately after the Trump trip was over on 16th, there was a summit of Arab Summit was there in Baghdad, in which again they have come up, rejected the plan, US plan, and they have come up with the reconstruction plan. So, amidst all this, do you think that can transactionalism of Trump can also lead to some kind of solution and peace in the
But
in
the
Gaza and
unfortunate
of the Palestine question?
the unfortunate thing is the Arabs could stay. The Arabs and everybody else, not just the Arabs, can stand on their head. It doesn't matter. The key the key relationship here is the United States and Israel. There is no other power. The Europeans have certain degree of leverage. We'll see whether or not they invoke Article 2 of the trade agreement that they have with Israel, whether they really go towards sanctions of Israel. They may. I'm not excluding that. And that would be real leverage on Israel. But ultimately, the major influence for external influence on Israel is the United States.
Oh,
Um, I think that Trump wants to see. Oh, let me put it this way: Trump came up with this plan. It wasn't just the Arabs who rejected it; it's been unanimously rejected by virtually everybody in the world. The problem with that plan is not whether Trump's plan is realistic. The problem with that plan is it's become official Israeli policy, declared Israeli policy. Not only has it become declared Israeli policy, it's become a war goal. With other words, Netanyahu has essentially said the Gaza war will not end until Gaza's been emptied of Palestinians. and the Israelis are on the ground. Trump is not.
All right.
So, in that sense, he has done the Middle East a tremendous disservice by coming forward with this idea. The other problem here is that Trump shares a number of the goals of Netanyahu. He wants to see the hostages freed today. He's not going to um, he's not going to spoil a deal in which you had a hostage exchange, as you have had throughout this war and have had a number of times prior to this war. But he wants to see the hostages first and foremost exchanged and or released, and he shares that with Netanyahu. He also shares with Netanyahu the notion that Hamas should be destroyed. And we're going to have to see how he responds to the June 17 meeting in New York, which has been convened under UN auspices by France and Saudi Arabia, which essentially seems to be putting forward recognition of the state of Palestine, and two, a plan that would let Hamas exist politically, but not militarily in the Gaza Strip, something that Netanyahu opposes and that fundamentally Trump opposes. Now, he has also finally, to round this off, he has also said in the last day or two that he wants to see this war end soon. The question is whether he's going to put his money where his mouth is, and match his words with action.
All right. So now, taking it forward, and now related to that, when the 17th on 17th May, this Arab summit was going on, the Foreign Ministry of Russia has issued a letter of invitation as well as an appreciation letter. In that, they are saying that for the first time, they are going to have the first Russian Arab summit eh, on October 15th. So immediately after the trip got over. So in that, what is the possible Russian geopolitical intent at this moment on this strategy after the trip of the President Donald Trump, strategy in the region, and what are the possible geopolitical consequences of this kind of pursuit if Russia is taking and trying to have more and more close relationship with the Arab states?
Well, Russia's always had a close relationship, not with the Gulf, but certainly with Arab states. You think back of Egypt, think of Syria, of Iraq. Uh, it's had a long-standing relationship, and it's always wanted access to a warm seaport. Um, that interest remains, and Russia will, of course, want to build relations uh, with the Middle East and with Middle Eastern states. At the same time, let's keep in mind that we're moving away from a unipolar world, if we have not already moved away from a unipolar world. Whether we're moving to a bipolar world or a tripolar world, in other words, a world in which India is a major player, or for that matter, a quadruple polar world, with Europe emerging as a much more stronger power, given its massive investment now in defense, which is going to change the European landscape, remains to be seen. But within that context, whether bipolar, tripolar, quadrupolar, whatever it may be, the second level of states, the Brazils, the South Africas, the Saudi Arabias, and so on, um, are going to have much greater maneuverability, and will want to keep their relations and their lines open to the other players in the region, even if things go ahead as they look like with the Trump trip, the United States will remain the dominant player.
All right, moving on now to Israel. There are a lot of talks about Israel and the guesses about the absence of Israel in the entire trip of President Donald Trump. My simple question is, how do you view this? What is your opinion about the current Israel US relations amidst these perceptible changes and shifts in the US actions during the trip? because you can see that Iran nuclear talk is going on, which Israel doesn't like, including civil nuclear deal with Saudi Arabia and the meeting of Syrian leaders.
I think there's no doubt that by going to the Gulf and not going to Israel, Trump was sending Netanyahu a message. He was essentially telling the Israelis, "You're not the only game in town, and we have interests of our own, which may or may not align with your interests."
Yes.
That's been a message that he, for all practical matters, has been sending Netanyahu from day one. Um, Sorry, those are mangoes dropping from the tree. Uh, um, so that's the message he's been sending all along. Now, I think we've got to be careful here. Trump is not going to fundamentally rupture the relationship between the United States and Israel. Keep in mind that a significant part of his base, of his supporter base, is pro-Israel. A significant portion of his support base is anti-Muslim.
Okay.
And so while what's happening in Gaza may go too far for some of those segments of American society, fundamentally, Israel, there's no country that's had the kind of grassroots support in the United States that Israel has had. And the
Yes.
support for the Israel lobby and the power of the Israeli lobby in Washington is not because of its Jewish base, it's because of its evangelical base. There are 6 million Jews in the United States. There are up to 100 million evangelicals in the United States. The figures speak for themselves. Now, that does not mean that there won't be differences, and we've already seen those differences. And I would assume that we're going to see those differences even more with relate to Gaza. You just had today the effort by the United States and Israel to circumvent the UN in terms of the provision of humanitarian aid in Gaza fall apart with the resignation of Wood, the um, the head of the organization that was founded to replace the UN. It's going to take significant pressure on Netanyahu to force him to truly come to a negotiating table to end the Gaza war. You're going to have issues over who controls Gaza post-war, and we
Yes.
can go down the line. But I think you've got to be careful not to interpret that as uh, a fundamental rupture.
Yes, Dr. James Dorsey, we have two more questions to go. First, I would like to come to my country, India, and I would like to see the trip from the India's point of view. And because the region has assumed a strategic significance, and we consider it as extended neighborhood of India, and during the Prime Minister Modi's tenure and last one decade, with the very dense diplomatic outreach and engagement, the region has come very close perimeter of India's foreign policy. So, how this trip is going to have any kind of implications for India, and anything you want to say what India should do?
Right. Well, I don't know that it's going to have a primary impact on India. This, you know, this trip again was primarily about U.S. Gulf relations and U.S. Israel relations as a matter of principle. It wasn't really about, and if you wish, U.S. Palestinian relations. I don't think it was a trip about global relationships. Now, India clearly, increasingly, is also a partner of the United States, uh, is heavily involved in technological cooperation with the United States. And so, what I think you're going to see is opportunities for partnership that will benefit Israel. And I mean, go back to the plan for a trade corridor that existed. I think it was announced, if I recall correctly, during the 2023 G20 in New Delhi, um, and that obviously fell apart with the Gaza war. But nonetheless, it's an indication that the United States, certainly the United Arab Emirates, and one would assume Saudi Arabia and Qatar, want to want those relationships to be and those opportunities potentially to involve India.
All right. So you have in the initial responses, you have said that you told that instead of three power centers, there is only two power centers. So my last question is related to that. Even then, I would like to ask you between because there are three, in my opinion, Iran, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. So so far the US policy was and the US order was always based on the Arab Israel against Iran. So, what are the possible changes in the regional geopolitical landscape you can see with this trip?
Well, I think there are two issues, one or two things. One, um, I think you're going to see a greater balance in terms of the Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar, versus Israel in terms of U.S. perspective of the region. Uh, I think with Iran, it's very much going to depend on whether or not we get a nuclear agreement. And that's the $64,000 question. Your guess is as good as mine. And then let me throw out a wild card. I think that fundamentally you have three major powers in the Middle East, all of them in degrees of disrepair, but that have the assets that the Gulf states don't have and that Israel doesn't have. And that's Turkey, Iran, and Egypt. They all have histories of empire. They have deep-seated identities. They have comparatively to the in the Middle East, huge populations of 80 million upwards. In Egypt's case, 110 million. They have highly educated populations. They fundamentally have diversified economies, even if those economies are in disrepair. Um, they have geography. Now, Saudi Arabia has some of those assets. It obviously has, and it has assets that the others don't have. So it clearly has geography. It's got a kind of financial muscle that potentially Iran could have once sanctions are lifted and it's able to reconstruct. And Saudi Arabia obviously has the Muslim holy cities. Whether that's going to, in the long term, give it enough to compete against states that have a lot more to offer remains to be seen.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. James Dorsey. Uh, nice talking to you. With this, we have come to the end of the edition of Expert Talk today. The session has unraveled many facets of the regional and global geopolitical implications of the President Trump trip. Hope, Dr. Dosi, we are going to join again for our next program on Indian future. On behalf of the Indian futures, thank you once again. And thank you everyone, those who have joined the session, and my special thank to our TIF technical team and the students. Thank you everyone.